The slap landed like a gunshot. A 12-year-old boy staggered in the middle of a greasy diner, his backpack tumbling to the floor, coins scattering across the tiles like broken promises. The boy's name was William. His skin was dark, his frame small, but his eyes, those eyes, refused to bow. Across from him stood Thomas, 16, towering at 6 feet, a gleaming football ring on his fist and cruelty etched across his smirk. "Learn to walk straight, kid," he barked, puffed up in front of his friends, their phones already raised to capture humiliation for likes and laughs. This was Fat Tony's Burger, the kind of place where kids gathered after school, noisy and unpoliced. For 2 years, Thomas had ruled here, extorting money, stomping on dignity, feeding off fear. And yet, when he struck William, something in the silence that followed hinted that this story would not unfold like all the others. William bent to the floor, collecting his coins. They were snack money, carefully counted by his grandmother that morning, meant to last the week. "Sorry," he murmured, not with weakness, but with measured calm. Thomas sneered and kicked the coins farther away. "Sorry doesn't buy sneakers like these. These shoes cost more than your whole house." Laughter erupted from the tables. No one stepped in. Dolores, the woman behind the counter, turned her face. She had seen this before. Thomas's father was a respected local businessman. William was a poor kid from the wrong side of the neighborhood, and in America, silence often sides with power. But William was not silent. He lifted his chin, looked his bully straight in the eye, and whispered, "My father also taught me about respect and about consequences." The cafeteria froze. Thomas scoffed. "What father? Bet you don't even have one." But his laugh cracked when William added softly yet deliberately, "Vincenzo Torino. Maybe you know the name." The air shifted. Even Thomas, who thrived on arrogance, had heard whispers of the Torino family. Tales traded in bars, murmured in alleys, men who made problems disappear, families untouchable, respect demanded, never requested. Thomas wanted to call him a liar, but his voice wavered. He could feel the phones recording, the eyes of his friends glued to him, waiting to see whether the king of Fat Tonys would stumble. William, calm beyond his years, smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Family is sacred," he said, "and when you mess with family, you learn what sacred means." In that moment, William did something even more dangerous than threatening. He calmly reached for his phone, checked the recording he'd left running beneath the table, and slid it back into his pocket. The boy had been calculating, documenting, preparing. He wasn't playing Thomas's game. He was playing a bigger one. The diner went silent. For the first time, Thomas realized that his slap, his laughter, his cruelty, all of it might carry consequences his father's money and influence couldn't erase. But Thomas wasn't finished. Pride wouldn't let him back down. And in the days that followed, Lincoln High School became the next battlefield. Backpacks vanished. Cruel notes appeared in William's desk. Hallways echoed with taunts. "Torino, think your Mafia daddy can save you here?" What Thomas didn't yet understand was this. Every cruel act was no longer a secret. Every insult was being turned into evidence. And William, the boy he thought too small to matter, had already learned the most dangerous lesson of all. That silence can be broken, and bullies can be exposed. What Thomas didn't know was that William was documenting everything. Every shove, every insult, every accident. Photos, notes, times, names of witnesses. Cataloged with the precision of someone far older than 12. He had already learned what his father always said: documentation is power, and power is justice when used wisely. Thompson is just testing boundaries, William muttered quietly over the phone at lunch, sitting alone on the patio with his notebook open. On the other end came the low, steady voice of Vincenzo Torino. Calm, controlled, dangerous. "Son, sometimes you let people like that hang themselves with their own rope. Keep watching, keep learning." But Thomas wasn't watching. He was escalating. On Thursday during gym class, William caught an elbow in the stomach during a basketball game. "An accident," Thomas claimed with a smirk. Coach Williams, who knew very well who Thomas's father was, simply turned his head. "Watch your step, Torino. Thomas whispered as William gasped for breath on the floor. Accidents happen when you don't know your place. Then came Friday, the day Thomas crossed a line he could never uncross. At recess, Thomas and four friends cornered William near the bathrooms, just out of reach of the security cameras, the perfect place for cruelty without witnesses. You know what, Torino? Thomas sneered, shoving him against the wall. I'm tired of your Mafia stories. My dad knows everyone who matters in this town. If your family was really dangerous, I'd have heard about it. William's response was calm. Too calm. Maybe, he said softly. You just don't know the right people. Liar. Thomas's fists clenched. I bet your father doesn't even exist. Just like most of— Be careful what you say next. William's voice cut through Thomas's bravado like a blade. Low, steady, heavy with authority no child should have carried. For a second, Thomas faltered, but pride shoved him forward. Or what? You gonna call your imaginary daddy? William smiled. Actually, good idea. He pulled out his phone. One button, one call. A voice answered. Deep, deliberate, with the faint Italian lilt every person in town had heard on the news or in boardrooms. Hello, Dad. I'm here with Thomas, the one I told you about. The group of boys froze. Even Thomas's smirk flickered. They knew that voice. Everyone knew that voice. Oh, yes, Vincenzo Torino replied smoothly. The Thompson boy. Son of the real estate man, isn't he? Interesting family. Put him on. William extended the phone. He wants to talk to you. Thomas's hands trembled as he took it. Hello? The voice on the other end was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was polite, almost gentle. And that made it worse. Thomas, I hear you and my son have had misunderstandings. Sir, we were just— Let me explain something, child. In my culture, family is sacred. And when someone disrespects my family, it becomes my personal problem. Thomas swallowed hard, sweat dripping at his temples. Behind him, his friends were already backing away, slipping out of sight. Now, Vincenzo continued, I'm sure this is nothing but a childish disagreement. William is polite, respectful. He doesn't look for trouble, but me? The voice paused, deliberate. I solve problems. It has always been my specialty. Yes, sir, I understand. Good. The calm voice sharpened just enough. Give the phone back to my son. Thomas obeyed as if the device itself burned his skin. William spoke in Italian for a brief moment, then ended the call with practiced ease. He pocketed the phone, looked Thomas in the eye, and said, He enjoyed speaking with you. Dad always says it's important to know the families of my classmates. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. Every shadow at the window looked like a figure watching. Every noise in the street felt like footsteps coming closer. He had grown up hearing whispers of the Torino family, businesses that never failed, rivals who simply vanished, authorities who asked no questions. And now he had humiliated, threatened, and laid hands on the son of the man everyone respected, or feared too much to name aloud. William slept soundly that weekend. Peace came easily to him when the pieces on the board were falling exactly where he wanted them. Thomas, on the other hand, spent 2 sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, heart pounding at every sound outside his window. On Saturday morning, his father received a call that only deepened the dread. Thompson, Vincenzo Torino here. I hear our sons have met. Perhaps we should discuss how they might get along better. Monday? The line went silent after that. A meeting was set. Thomas's imagination did the rest. What would it mean for his family? For his father's business? For him? Each act of cruelty Thomas had inflicted, every shove in the hallway, every note stuffed in a locker, every elbow thrown under the guise of accident, had only made William stronger. The bully couldn't see it, but William's strength wasn't loud or violent. It was silent, disciplined, sharpened by injustice. Every humiliation Thomas delivered was, unknowingly, another nail in his own coffin. By Monday morning, Thomas looked like he had aged years. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders hunched. Every black car that passed on the street made him flinch. At 8:30 sharp, he walked into Lincoln High School, nerves rattling like chains. William, by contrast, was composed. He greeted teachers with polite nods, opened his locker, and stacked his books neatly, as if preparing for another ordinary day. Thompson. The voice of Principal Peterson cut through the hallway like a verdict. My office, now. Thomas's knees weakened. Was this about the meeting, the assaults, something worse? Inside the office, Peterson closed the door with deliberate care. His expression was heavy. Your father called me. He mentioned some disagreements between you and William. Would you like to explain what happened? Thomas stammered. It was just a silly argument, sir. An argument that resulted in physical assaults. Peterson slid a folder across the desk. We have witnesses, Thomas, and videos. Thomas's blood ran cold. It wasn't just the phone call William had recorded. He had documented everything. Every insult, every shove, every whispered threat, neatly filed like evidence in a courtroom. Peterson flipped through the folder, screenshots of Thomas's mocking messages, statements from classmates, time-stamped photos. This is systematic bullying, the principal said flatly. And against a minor. 3-day suspension, and you will issue a public apology. How did he get my messages? Thomas whispered. Peterson looked up, his eyes heavy with irony. It seems some of your friends were eager to cooperate, once they realized who William's father was. The door closed behind Thomas, leaving him hollow, stripped of his swagger. Meanwhile, William was in the library, quietly working on his science project. Not volcanoes, not solar systems. His project was a meticulous presentation titled How Technology Can Be Used to Document Injustice. Miss Rodriguez, the librarian, approached him with a soft smile. William, your uncle is here. A tall man entered the room. Vincent Torino. He did not look like the shadow whispered about in backroom stories. He wore an elegant, understated suit, a leather briefcase in hand, more lawyer than criminal. He leaned down, kissed William on the forehead, and spoke warmly. Ciao, nipote. Your father told me about the school trouble. William smiled faintly. It's not a problem anymore, Zio Vincent. It's being resolved. Vincent's eyes glimmered with pride. Good. Your father wants you to understand something. There are many ways to resolve conflict. Some teach a harsher lesson, others a more educational one. Word of Vincent Torino's presence spread through the teacher's lounge like sparks in dry grass. And for the first time, the story of a quiet boy standing up to a bully was no longer just about schoolyard cruelty. It had become a parable of power, silence, and what happens when the underestimated learn how to turn injustice into proof. Everyone knew who the Torino family was, though no one dared speak their name too loudly. Some whispered about donations that quietly funded school projects. Others recalled how disciplinary problems involving certain families simply disappeared. Coach Williams, who had turned a blind eye during gym class, suddenly remembered seeing irregularities in Thomas's behavior. Dolores from Fat Tony's, the woman who had looked away in silence, called the school offering to testify about the slap that started it all. Fear, it seemed, had found its voice. At 3:30 p.m., Charles Thompson arrived at Lincoln High, his BMW rolling into the parking lot like a hearse. His hands shook on the wheel, his jaw locked in forced composure. Waiting for him was Vincenzo Torino, leaning against a flawless black Cadillac, calmly folding an Italian newspaper as if time itself bowed to him. Mr. Thompson, Vincenzo greeted, his tone courteous, precise. Mr. Torino. Charles tried to muster the confidence that had carried him through years of real estate deals. I'm sure we can resolve this, like civilized men. Of course. Vincenzo smiled faintly. Step into my office. It's more private. What happened in that car stayed behind tinted glass. But when Charles emerged 20 minutes later, his face was bloodless, his hands trembling. He avoided every gaze, walked straight to his son, and whispered the only words Thomas would remember. We're moving, end of the month. Dad, what did he say? What happened? Thomas's voice cracked. Charles pulled him into the shadows of the building. He showed me photos, son. Photos of our house, our properties, your class schedule, where your mother shops, even the vet's name for our dog. Thomas's heart stopped. But he didn't threaten us, did he? He didn't have to. Charles ran a hand through his hair, eyes darting around. He only said one thing. Family is sacred. Teach your son the value of respecting other families. While father and son trembled, William was calmly organizing his books in his locker. Vincent had already left the school, but not before handing his nephew a discreet package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a sleek, advanced phone. Not just a smartphone, but something engineered for precision. A handwritten note in Italian. To document your education. With love, Zio Vincent. That evening, William sat with his parents at their modest but immaculate kitchen table. His mother, Sandra, served steaming lasagna while Vincenzo scrolled through work emails on his tablet. Dad, William said softly, Thomas is moving away at the end of the month. Vincenzo looked up over his glasses. And how do you know that? William's voice was steady, deliberate. Because when you plant the right seeds, you can predict exactly how they'll grow. Sandra froze, serving spoon midair, her son's words carrying the weight of someone far older. Vincenzo set his tablet aside and studied William. You're learning, he said slowly. But remember, true power is not about fear. It's about respect. Respect for who you are, not who your father is. William nodded, a flicker of something sharper than innocence in his eyes. I know, Dad. That's why Thomas doesn't know the most important part yet. And what's that? William's smile wasn't childish. It was measured, calculated. That I didn't document everything just to protect myself. I did it to protect the others. Inside William's school folder was a dossier. Names, dates, witnesses, recordings. At least 8 other students Thomas had tormented over the last 2 years. Each page was a voice that had been silenced. Each file a truth waiting to be heard. Tomorrow, William said, I'm handing it to the student council. Not as the son of Vincenzo Torino, but as William, a student who refuses to let others go through what I went through. Vincenzo leaned back in his chair, pride and concern flickering across his face. His son was learning the most dangerous lesson of all, that the greatest weapon isn't fear, but truth. At only 12 years old, William was proving he possessed something far rarer than intelligence. He had a sense of justice that reached beyond personal revenge. By Tuesday morning, Thomas discovered his transfer papers had been rushed through, but the greater blow was waiting for him inside the school auditorium. A presentation was being prepared by the student council, a presentation on patterns of toxic behavior at Lincoln High. Thomas's name appeared on slide after slide. William had done the unthinkable. He had turned his own victimization into a systematic campaign against bullying. Every push, every insult, every witness statement, cataloged with the precision of someone who already understood that documentation is power. Thomas hadn't just been defeated, he had been outmaneuvered. His cruelty had been transformed into education. His violence into a lesson. His private reign of intimidation into a public reckoning. While Thomas packed his bags for a forced move, William prepared to step into something larger. Not survival, not revenge, but leadership. The day of the presentation. Thursday morning, the auditorium overflowed. Students filled every seat. Parents stood against the walls. Teachers whispered nervously at the back. Even a few local reporters had been quietly invited. On stage, William walked out in his pressed school shirt, carrying a laptop and a quiet, unwavering confidence. It wasn't the posture of a traumatized child. It was the bearing of someone who had studied power, not to abuse it, but to use it with purpose. He connected the projector cables with the same precision his father used in business meetings. The first slide lit up the screen, a 2-year timeline of bullying incidents, each one dated, named, and documented. The crowd gasped in unison. My name is William, he began, his voice clear, professional, unshaken. Over the last 2 years, I have documented 47 incidents of intimidation, physical assault, and psychological humiliation in this school. The patterns are consistent. Older, wealthier students targeting younger children, or those from working class and immigrant families. His words sliced through the silence of the room. Thomas sat in the third row, ordered by the principal to attend as part of his suspension. Sweat rolled down his palms as his name appeared in red across more than half the cases. William clicked to the next slide. This is Thomas physically assaulting 11-year-old Kevin Martinez in September of last year. The video played, shaky but undeniable. Thomas shoving a smaller boy into lockers, yanking away his lunch money. A murmur rippled through the audience. Here is Thomas humiliating Lisa Chun in October. Another clip. Thomas mocking her accent, students laughing in the background. Lisa's face frozen between shame and silence. Slide by slide, William unveiled what had always been whispered but never proven. Screenshots of messages where Thomas bragged, videos where he played the tyrant, witness statements from kids too afraid to speak until someone else broke the silence. As the evidence mounted, Thomas seemed to shrink into his chair. Around him, faces turned toward him, not in fear as they once had, but in disgust. Parents who once dismissed bullying as kids being kids now whispered with outrage. Teachers shifted uneasily, realizing their silence had enabled this pattern. And standing at the center of it all was William. Not simply a boy who had been bullied, but a boy who had transformed pain into strategy, fear into proof, and humiliation into collective justice. The auditorium was no longer watching a student presentation. They were witnessing the birth of a leader. Today, I taught another brat not to cross my path. The words flashed on the screen, a screenshot of Thomas's own bragging message. His mother, seated in the front row, buried her face in her hands. His father, Charles, sat pale and motionless, realizing this was no longer about a schoolyard fight. It was a public unmasking. But William was far from finished. What I discovered through this investigation, he continued, his voice carrying the calm authority of a seasoned prosecutor, is that Thomas's violence wasn't random. It was systematic, coordinated, and, most importantly, ignored. The next slide appeared, emails between Thomas and other students plotting their next targets like a cruel game. A list of names, methods of humiliation, schedules. William turned toward the crowd. Coach Williams, he said, locking eyes with the gym teacher. You stood by during at least 12 assaults in your class. You chose not to act. I have the videos here. Gasps filled the auditorium as footage rolled. Thomas shoving smaller students, fists flying, while the coach deliberately looked away. And Dolores Santos, William pressed on, an employee at Fat Tony's Burger. You admitted you knew Thomas was aggressive but stayed silent because he was the son of an influential man. An audio clip filled the speakers, Dolores' voice trembling, saying, "Better not mess with the Thompson boy. His dad has power." The walls of silence were cracking. Every adult who had looked away was now exposed. Thomas rose suddenly, desperate to flee. But escape was impossible. At the back of the hall stood Vincenzo Torino, quietly stationed near the door. He wasn't there to intimidate. He was there to witness his son's lesson. Two men in dark suits, discreet but unmistakable, blocked the exits. And then came the climax. On the screen, the video from Fat Tony's diner. The slab, the coins scattering across the floor. Thomas's voice spitting insults. The sound of laughter. The cruelty captured in sharp detail. William froze the frame at the exact moment Thomas's hand struck his face. He turned slowly to the audience. Do you know what my first reaction was? His voice softened. It wasn't anger. It was sadness. Sadness because Thomas isn't just a bully. He's the product of a system that teaches privileged children they can treat others as less than human. Thomas's body shook. Tears streamed down his face as hundreds of eyes bore into him. His mother tried to shield him, but no protection remained. This presentation, William continued, is not about Thomas. It's about us. About whether we protect violent privilege or defend vulnerable children. The final slide appeared. Photos of Thomas's victims. 23 faces. Boys and girls ages 10 to 14. Some smiling, some solemn. All children who had carried scars in silence. Thomas destroyed the confidence of 23 classmates, William said. He stole from at least 15. He humiliated immigrants. He left wounds that will last for years. And all of it was tolerated because of his last name, because adults chose silence. The room was frozen, breathless. Then William delivered his closing words. My proposal is simple. Zero tolerance for bullying, no matter the family name. Mandatory staff training to recognize abuse. And most importantly, a support program so victims can finally speak without fear. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the applause began. First scattered, then swelling, then thunderous. Students stood, parents clapped, teachers nodded through tears. Phones rose into the air, capturing history. William had taken his own humiliation and turned it into revolution. Thomas cowered behind his mother, sobbing, no longer the predator but the exposed coward. And within hours, the story would spread far beyond Lincoln High. Thomas, once the untouchable bully, would now be known nationwide as the boy who preyed on children and wept when truth caught him. As the Thompson family slipped out of the auditorium, heads bowed and steps hurried, William stepped down from the stage into a sea of students and parents reaching out to shake his hand. Some hugged him, some simply whispered, "Thank you." At the back of the room, Vincenzo stood with a quiet smile, pride glimmering in his eyes. Thomas had learned a lesson he would never forget. When you choose to humiliate someone you think is weak, you risk discovering that strength often hides in unexpected places. And when that strength is revealed, the consequences cut deeper than any punch, any slap, any shove in a hallway. The real question was not whether Thomas would survive his public collapse, but whether he would rise from it a changed person, or remain forever trapped in the shadow of his exposed cruelty. 3 months later, Lincoln High School was almost unrecognizable. Posters against bullying lined the walls. Student-led workshops trained peers to spot signs of harassment. Teachers were now required to intervene, not ignore. And at the center of it all was William, unanimously elected president of the Student Council. His campaign, Document to Protect, had already spread to 200 schools across 12 states, sparking a movement larger than anyone imagined. Meanwhile, Thomas never recovered from the exposure. His family fled to another state, but the videos followed him everywhere. College admissions officers searched his name and closed their doors. Summer jobs evaporated after quick background checks. His reputation had become his prison. William's path was the opposite. He received full scholarships from 5 prestigious universities. CNN aired a documentary on his work, and he spoke with calm conviction. I didn't destroy Thomas. I just showed the truth. My father always said the best revenge is success. I believe the best justice is transparency. Graduation. Years later, in a packed gymnasium draped with banners, William walked across the stage to receive 3 awards: academic merit, community leadership, and civil courage. His father, usually so composed, clapped harder than anyone, pride shining openly. Cameras flashed, students cheered, and far away in front of a computer screen, Thomas watched quietly on YouTube. At his new school, no one knew his past, but every time he saw another child pushed, mocked, or silenced, William's words echoed in his mind. Family is sacred. The lesson was simple. Underestimating someone because of their appearance, their background, or their silence is the first step toward your own downfall. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear school uniforms and carry backpacks. Sometimes they rise not by fighting fire with fire, but by turning pain into power and humiliation into a call for justice. And William had proven one thing above all. Dignity has no age, and justice does not wait for anyone to grow older.